So we're going to look at a 4-step buttonhole machine, and if you've got a 4-step buttonhole feature, then you will have a buttonhole foot that looks just like this. So it's got an outer shell and it's got an inner bit that moves up and down, and this is the bar that attaches to your sewing machine. So just like a 1-step buttonhole foot, you've got a little hook at the top and 2 little crooks at the bottom, and so this bit here will sit towards you, closest to you, and this bit's further away. Now what you'll notice on the edge of this is a gauge, and this is to help you measure against your buttons to make sure you're making a buttonhole that is going to be suitable for the button that you've chosen to use in your project. Now buttons are generally speaking uniformed in size, so they do tend to go up in 5mm, although the smaller the button, the more likely you're going to get little variations on that. So you may end up with a 12mm button opposed to a 10 or a 15mm. Now when we come to measure it, it's important that we start measuring from that bottom red line, and this is because when this is at the very bottom, your stitching line begins there. It doesn't begin there, it begins there where the corresponding red marks are. So when we measure it, we want to make sure that the diameter, the bottom of the button, and the diameter is equal to the gauge on the side. So in this instance, it's probably about 10mm. That said, you do also want to add an additional 5mm or so that you've got plenty of room in the buttonhole in which to put your button through. If you only did it to the exact diameter of your button, then you will not be able to get your button through the buttonhole. If you're working with a button that is slightly raised or has a slightly bigger shank, then you may want to add in another 5mm just to accommodate for that. But once we've got that measured, we will end up sewing our buttonhole up to that point, zigzagging and sewing it all the way down and zigzagging. So I'll go and show you how to do that now. So we're now going to look at the setup of this machine. So a 4-step buttonhole function in your stitch library will look like this, and in this instance we've got it numbered. So step 1 will go up the left hand side of the buttonhole, step 2 will zigzag across the top, step 3 will come down on the right hand side of the buttonhole, and step 4 will do the bottom zigzag to close that off. Now you sometimes find that the numbers go in different orders, so you might start at 1, 2, 3, 4, or sometimes you start from the top down and it ends up being back to front. But you also sometimes find that these are in fact made up of letters, so A, B, C, D. But essentially you're having to change the function on your machine depending on which part of the buttonhole you are sewing. So if your machine has the capacity to change its stitch length and stitch width, then you're going to need to change the stitch length down to about 0.6mm, and that is situated between 0 and 1. And you'll notice on this machine, and a lot of machines will do this, that they put an illustration of a buttonhole to indicate that this is where you need to calibrate your stitch length to. If you can calibrate your stitch width, we're probably going to aim for about 3.5. You may want to go a little bigger. It is completely up to you, but you certainly do not want it sitting at 0 because your stitch won't zigzag that way. So you definitely need to set it at least at about 2 or 3, but I would aim for 3.5. So on some manual machines, but not all manual machines, you may see something that looks a little like this. Sometimes it's on the front of the machine, sometimes it's on the side, very occasionally it's on the back. And this allows you to take a screwdriver and manually change the tightness of the stitching, the zigzag stitching, when you're doing a buttonhole. So this is a common feature on machines that don't have the capacity to change the stitch length or stitch width. But again, that's not a universal truth. But you will need to get in with a screwdriver and tighten and loosen. So if you do see that, that is designed to help improve the quality of your buttonhole stitch. And do check your manual to help you calibrate this properly. Right, so I've gauged my button, I have calibrated my machine. I now need to put my buttonhole foot onto the attachment. So as I said before, I want the two little crooks facing me, so I'm going to place that on. I'm just going to click that into position, and you will see that this moves up and down. I've got my piece of interfaced fabric ready to go, and I'm going to make sure I understand whether my machine sews from the bottom upwards or from the top down. Now if your machine starts stitching from the top down, what you would need to do is you would need to calibrate the inner dots with the outer one that you have measured your buttonhole to, and then you would start stitching from there. However, my machine starts from the bottom upwards. Okay, so it's quite hard to know what to do with your tail thread, so I tend to just grip it until it starts moving. Right, so I'm going to move my setting to 1, and the first part of my zigzag is where the machine runs it up the left side. So I'm just going to place my needle in, and I'm going to let it do its thing. And you'll see the inner part moving up, and I'm going to stop just when it hits that gauged mark, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 up. Perfect. Now I'm going to lift my needle, I'm going to turn it to setting 2, and I'm going to run probably somewhere between 6 and 8 zigzag stitches. You don't want to do too much more, because these zigzag stitches are on top of each other, and if you do much more, it'll get higher and higher and higher, and you won't be able to move your foot over it, so it will just get jammed. So I'm moving this over to 3 now, needle in, and this is going to walk it back down the right hand side. I'm going to stop when I get to the bottom, needle up, and then I'm going to do again another 6 or 7 stitches along the bottom just to close that up. There we go, we have our buttonhole. So if you really wanted to, you could go over it once more, but you've got to be cautious about how deep and how thick the thread is getting. But that's how you do a 4-step buttonhole on a machine like this. So the last thing we need to do is to open up these buttonholes, and there's several ways you can do this. Now, a very common recommendation in patterns is that you get a pin and you run it across the top of your buttonhole, and then when you come in with your seam ripper, you are able to run it up, and the pin will stop it from accidentally ripping through these top stitches and subsequently into the garment. So that is this method. You can also choose to stop halfway through the buttonhole. So I'm just going to open that to about the middle, and I'm going to come in from the other side and I'm going to open that to the middle, and that there allows you to open up that buttonhole. And then the final way, and I love this way, is that you place your point of your seam ripper, your pointy part of the seam ripper through the bottom, and then you find its opposite side from the underneath, essentially folding the buttonhole in half, and then you can run it up to the middle and you have opened that up. And these will then fit your buttons through beautifully.